Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Adriana Zabala, who is a world-renowned mezzo-soprano and professor of voice at Yale School of Music. Adriana, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
So I am so excited to talk with you. Yale's one of our wonderful partners, one of our creative partners for the show, helped us to co-curate this show. But I thought what would be great, because I want to talk with you about, just the balance of careers and how we look at things as building a life in the arts these days. But could you kind of paint that picture of what your kind of current life is in the arts and that balance of performing, teaching, etc.?
Well, I don't know that there is the elusive balance that we all talk about and kind of look for. I think in as long as I've been doing this, one of the conclusions I've come to for myself is to not look at everything as different things, but all as simply my life. So my life happens. The one life that I have, I get to be a mother and a partner. I get to be a professor of voice, and I get to be a performing artist. And the way that I approach my one life is by cultivating all of those things, sometimes on the same track, sometimes separating it when it's necessary. But it's worked out very well for me in my mind and in my heart to view this all as a whole of the way I am privileged to live my life. Rather than thinking I'm this, I'm also that, and when I'm that, I'm not this. So I really view it all as a very holistic way of being in the world and getting to be in the world through art. And I live that with my students and my family and my colleagues.
So that is amazing, right? But I know there's probably some in our audience who are looking and saying, oh yeah, that sounds picture perfect. That's so great. But how on earth is she able to do that? So what I was wondering is, are there any key tools, mechanisms, compartmentalizing, or, that you go through either weekly or daily routines that enable you to be successful in each of these areas and different areas? So even though they create a singular life, are there methods that you use that might help those in our audience who are struggling maybe to combine all those things in a way where it feels unified and comfortable?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and you're absolutely right. I didn't wiggle my nose and get to this kind of holistic place. Turning back the clock, and something I would say to listeners of every stage and age is, in my case, when I was very young, and I had 3-4 jobs and getting through school and all of those things and dreaming of a life in the arts. I tried very hard to, if I had to look at something like not one, but maybe 3 minimum wage jobs, I tried to have them be kind of part and parcel with what I was interested in. So I was working in the music library, and I was working in an independent bookstore that played phenomenal avant-garde jazz, and another job was at a thrift store with a social mission. The idea being, at the time, I don't know that I was all that wise about it, other than the fact that I had maybe family who encouraged me, okay, you have to have a job, make sure you're spending your time on something that's of real value as a human being and as an aspiring artist. And in those jobs, as you can imagine from the ones that I just mentioned, I'm learning about composers I had never heard of in the music library, and I'm learning the names of authors and jazz artists I had never heard of when I was working in the bookstore. And in the thrift shop that I worked in, it was an entirely different world of people in need and how people put things together to make their lives work. All of all of the things you pick up from everything you can experience, hopefully in some way can fuel that central focus. I think maybe the key, Erin, is keeping the central focus and understanding the many ways in which it can be nourished, rather than necessarily thinking of it again as anything fragmented. And I know it's not easy to put together, that's for sure. I do, when you ask now, how do I remind myself of that and how do I keep that approach? I do some self-talking. I talk to myself once in a while on a bad day where I think this is wrong or that's unpleasant. I think, hold on a second. There are so many elements and elements of good fortune, but also hard-fought elements that brought me to where I need to retain the perspective on the value of getting to live in the arts, getting to teach and discuss and learn about that with my students and continue to experience that as an artist. But I will say it comes from a couple of decades at most of the difficult junctures, trying very, very hard to make sure that the next step was into something that I valued as a human being that was in some way then going to feed my art making.
And if there was, someone in our audience or a student who was asking you and saying, I feel like I'm stuck in having to make a decision between doing more of my professional work versus whether it's actual family or personal time that I feel contributes more to my wellness. There are so many students, right, who feel, or people who are early on in their careers who feel like they face that decision or that choice. What would you say to them, or how would you advise them?
I love that question. It really moves me, actually. It's one of the beauties of getting older, isn't it, my dear? That we get to say, to students, I'm 20 years down the road from you, I'm 30 years down the road from where you are. And honestly, what I would say to anyone feeling that, again, at any age, any stage, is to practice patience and self-compassion. I would say that sometimes what can feel like high pressure and binary decisions, it has to be this or that we can take away some of the acuteness of that binary situation by squarely prioritizing our wellness. That is to say, we look after ourselves, we have compassion with ourselves and others. That's going to allow us at some point, even if we don't know what point that is, to go in with a more full heart and more readiness to create and be vulnerable and to learn. So I would really say, try to practice taking pressure off oneself. If it's a matter of wellness and survival even, then that is definitely the priority.
So one additional thing, a little bit kind of a different focus, kind of more on the professional, which is if there were, maybe 2 or 3 key things that you would want someone to leave this interview with. And it could be academia or performance space, but kind of, take these 2, maybe even 3 things away with you. That would be my suggestions that you might focus on. What would those be?
I love that question. I'll throw one out and then we'll see if we have time for more. On a practical level, one thing that I wish across the board in academia and nonprofits and companies and presenting organizations, I would love it, and I would love to be a part of feeling that implementing mentorship and cultivating mentorship at every level were a priority, a mission statement level priority of every organization. So if we're looking at academia, for example, I teach in the graduate school. I would love it if we were encouraging our students and fostering and giving a structure for our students to be interacting on a structured level, with, of course, a lot of leeway and flexibility with undergraduates who are also musicians or who are just curious about opera and performance and collaboration. I would like to see at a faculty level that even if someone has a lot of experience, when they are new, that within 24 hours, they are meeting their faculty mentor. that the college students are mentoring high school students, that the high school students are mentoring middle school students. So I really am talking about at every level. There, in my experience and in my thoughts and in what I read and think about and discuss with many colleagues, there is no downside. There is no downside. And there's just so many aspects of connection, continuity, vulnerability, learning, growth on both sides, mentor, mentee. So that's my number one thing, is the idea of spreading mentorship top to bottom.
I absolutely love that. And especially not just kind of the traditional, oh, okay, mentorship for a student, et cetera, but on all levels. Absolutely love that. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time. So, but I always like to ask of all my guests, and this may even tie to another thing to leave people with, is that
Yes.
in balancing this extraordinary career, there has to be some tough days for you. And on those days where you feel most challenged, what do you do? How do you turn for strength, for insight, for guidance during the toughest of times?
Oh, that's again a beautiful question, and it does tie into something I'd like to leave everyone with, and it's to have the courage to spread joy. And when my well is dry and I need to replenish, I try to remind myself of that. I remind myself of the joy of connection, the joy of expression, the joy of belonging in the world, of the human experience. I personally find it in film and books and poetry and music, I'm sure as many of our listeners do. But I would also say that that's something we can remember as individuals, as well as in our organizations. It takes courage to spread joy, because spreading joy is vulnerable. You're saying, I love this thing. The next person may not. So I don't want to say only spread joy. I want to say we need to find the courage to spread joy and really enjoy that process and our role in that spreading of our passion and our joy.
Adriana Zabala, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for everything you do, and thank you for being on the show.
It's such a pleasure, Aaron. Thank you so much for having me.